Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fascinating stack of sources that challenge pretty much all of our assumptions about structural complexity in ancient texts.
They really do. This isn't your typical historical or theological discussion. We're talking about visual geometry, deep mathematics.
Exactly. Our listener sent us material that focuses on the structural architecture of the Quran, and we're going to be looking way beyond the traditional analysis of what the words mean.
Right. We're diving into the physical arrangement, the line breaks, the page layouts, even the statistical frequency of specific words.
And the central claim that runs through all of these sources is that these patterns are, well, they're just too precise, too intricate, and frankly, too pervasive to be a coincidence or, the result of some human effort.
The claim is that there's this profound intentional symmetry, a kind of divine blueprint, if you will, that went completely unnoticed for centuries.
A blueprint that was only discovered much, much later and then validated across different manuscripts and through some pretty rigorous statistical analysis.
We're basically looking for evidence of foresight, a structure that underpins the words themselves, built right into the physical presentation of the text.
And our mission today is to unpack all of this, to really dig into the visual and mathematical evidence that the source material claims points almost inexorably to a divine arrangement.
So, yeah, prepare yourselves. It's a pretty compelling set of arguments.
Okay, let's jump right in. Section 1. The foundation for really all the later discoveries comes from this one concept, the perfect page.
And this is so important to understand. It's not just about, good book design that's aesthetically pleasing.
No, it's about a design that is derived from the book itself, using its own internal content as the absolute non-negotiable standard for its own layout.
The story starts, surprisingly, not in ancient times, but in the late 1800s, with a figure named Hafiz Osman Nuri.
An Ottoman calligrapher, and from what the sources say, a legendary one.
Legendary is the right word. He had this almost obsessive dedication. The sources tell us he wrote the entire Quran, by hand, 106 times.
Just stop and think about that for a second. 106 times. That level of immersion. It's not just copying, that's like inhabiting the text.
Exactly. And it's that sheer repetitive immersion that allowed him to even start asking the questions that led to this discovery. He asked himself a really fundamental question.
What is the best, most structurally sound way to write the Quran? How do you compile this text into a readable book, a mushaf?
And the inspiration he got was a complete breakthrough in design philosophy. He decided to stop using any external measures, no established page sizes, no rulers, nothing.
Instead, he decided to use the Quran's own content as the measurement standard for its own physical layout. It's a radical idea.
It is, and it led to two key design principles, based purely on the extremes found within the text itself.
Okay, so for the first principle, he needed to determine the exact length of every single line in the book.
And to do that, he looked for the minimum requirement. He found the shortest complete chapter in the entire Quran, which is Surah Al-Kawthar.
And he used the total length of that single shortest chapter to establish the absolute non-negotiable standard for the maximum length of every line.
Right. And then for the page length, he went to the other extreme, the maximum. He located the longest single verse in the entire text.
That's Ayat al-Mudayana, the verse about debt.
Exactly. And that verse, naturally, would have to fit on one page. So its length determined the length of every single page in the book.
The logic is kind of beautiful in its simplicity. If a page can hold the longest verse, then that has to be the correct size for every page.
So you have a line standard dictated by the minimum text and a page standard dictated by the maximum text. The entire design system is completely self-referential.
And what's so crucial here, as the source really emphasizes, is that this rule wasn't imposed externally, it was discovered internally. The text's own minimum and maximum sizes became the structural parameters.
This is where that statistical barrier comes in. I mean, if the text was composed by a human responding to different events over 23 years, there's absolutely no reason why the shortest and longest sections should just happen to correlate perfectly with the spatial dimensions needed to compile the whole book without any errors.
I have to pause here, though. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. The text was compiled centuries before Hafiz Osman Nuri. Couldn't the compilers have, made small edits, added a word here, changed punctuation there, just to force the verses to fit the pages?
That's the critical question, and the source material addresses it head-on. The text's linguistic structure is considered sacred and rigid. Any alteration, even a small one, to force a physical alignment would break the theological and linguistic authenticity.
So the perfection had to be inherent. It had to be discovered, not sort of reverse engineered.
Precisely. If the calligrapher had just adjusted the line length by a millimeter to make a verse fit, the whole project would be considered structurally impure. The rules had to be absolute.
And this leads to what the sources call the 600-page miracle. When he started writing the entire text using these two uncompromising internal measurements,
The shortest surah for the line, the longest verse for the page.
he found that the structure aligned perfectly across the entire 600-page text.
And let's be very clear about what perfect alignment means here. We're talking about a final work of roughly 600 pages. Every single one of those pages started with a complete verse and ended precisely at the completion of another verse.
Wow. So no verse was ever broken or split. You never get a situation where the last line of page 20 is the start of a verse and you have to flip to page 21 to finish it.
Never. It's the ultimate self-referential design system that results in zero textual bleed.
The complexity of that is it's hard to fathom. You have over 6,200 verses of wildly varying length. Some are a single word, others are an entire page long.
And if you just randomly select a line length and a page length, the probability of 600 consecutive pages perfectly starting and stopping at the boundary of a complete verse is statistically, it's infinitesimal.
It implies that the length of every word, the placement of every break, the ordering of the revelation itself was somehow pre-calculated to fit this 600-page template.
It's an incredible claim. Sources use an analogy. Imagine asking an AI to rewrite the entire collection of Shakespeare's works.
Okay.
But you impose two absolute rules. The line length has to be based on his shortest sonnet, and the page length has to be based on Hamlet's longest soliloquy.
And then you ask the AI, does every single one of the, say, 600 pages in the final volume start and end with a complete, unbroken poetic stanza?
Exactly. The chances are zero. It just wouldn't work. Yet this mushaf, based on text revealed over 2 decades, perfectly adheres to the rule.
And because of this specific structure was quickly adopted across the Islamic world. It wasn't just practical. It was seen as a confirmation that the text was structured not just for meaning, but with its eventual physical layout pre-engineered.
And that perfect page structure then became the canvas for the next layer of discoveries, even deeper, more subtle geometric patterns.
Okay, so if the 600-page alignment was the macro miracle, this is where it gets really interesting on the micro level. The perfect layout created by Hafiz Osman Nuri wasn't the end of the story.
No, it was just the beginning. It provided the precise, standardized canvas for another layer of structure that was discovered decades later.
Because the line length and page size were now fixed, other relationships became visible that were just, hidden in earlier, less rigorous manuscripts.
Right. And in 1932, a scholar named Badiüzzaman started noticing these hidden symmetries within this specific compilation style. It was like the perfectly arranged pages suddenly revealed an invisible structure laid out on top of them.
And what he found was just astonishing: vertical and mirrored word alignment.
Keywords, names for God, names of prophets, specific thematic concepts. They were arranged in ways that appeared intentionally patterned, like beads on a string just running straight down the page.
Let's start with the names for God. Words like Allah, Rab, which means Lord or Creator, and Rahman or Rahim, the merciful.
The vertical alignment of the word Rab is one of the most compelling examples. If you turn to page 35 of this mushaf, the word Rab appears 5 times, and they are stacked perfectly, vertically, one line directly under the other.
The probability of that happening by chance is low, but it gets more extreme.
It does. On page 259, the word Rab appears an incredible 9 times, stacked perfectly, running down a huge portion of the page.
Let's think about the mechanics of that. The line length is fixed. The text has to flow. It has to make sense.
For 9 separate sentences on one page to coincidentally need the word Rab, and for those words to align perfectly vertically, it means the surrounding text, all the other words, had to precisely fill the available space to leave Rab in the exact same starting column, 9 times.
The foresight that requires is incredible. And the patterns get even more intense when you look at facing pages. This introduces the idea of mirrored alignment.
Yes, take the word Allah. If you open the book to pages 62 and 63, what you see is stunning.
On page 62, the word Allah is repeated 9 times, arranged vertically. It's almost like a solid column down the page.
And then you look at the opposite page, page 63. The word is also repeated 9 times, stacked in a vertical column, creating a near-perfect mirror image when the book is open flat.
It's visually balanced across the entire spread. And we see this again, right, on pages 82 and 83.
We do. The word Allah appears 4 times across the 2 pages, perfectly aligning with each other across the gap.
It really forces you to ask, why would a text, revealed piece by piece over 2 decades, maintain this kind of visual, geometric arrangement in a book format that wouldn't exist for centuries?
Well, the proponents of this claim argue it demonstrates a layer of structure beyond just semantics. The text isn't just the carrier of information, it's a visual artifact. The placement of divine names serves a geometric, almost worshipful purpose.
And the intentionality required to achieve that, given the way it was revealed. The sources say that's the evidence of non-human design.
But maybe the most thematically profound example is what's called the page of maximum mention, page 422.
Okay, so on this single page, the word Allah appears 15 times. That's the highest frequency in the entire 604-page Quran.
And here's the connection. The third line from the bottom of this exact page begins with the verse, "O you who believe, remember Allah with much remembrance."
Wow. So the page that literally asks the reader for maximum remembrance also contains the maximum number of instances of his name.
Exactly. The physical layout itself reinforces the message of the verse. That's a level of synchronicity that's hard to dismiss as a coincidence.
And the sources then show this isn't just for names of God. This structural foresight applies to narrative elements as well, like the names of the prophets.
For example, on page 327, you have the names Suleiman, who is Solomon, and Wadad and David. They're stacked vertically. Wa Suleiman, Suleiman, Wa Suleiman, and Wadad and Daud.
The wa just means and, so the vertical flow groups them together visually, mirroring their father-son relationship in the story.
Another powerful example is on page 449. The names of Musa, Moses, Harun, Aaron, and Ishaq, Isaac, all appear stacked. And what's noted is that each name appears exactly twice.
Musa, Musa, Harun, Harun, Ishaq, Ishaq. All perfectly aligned vertically. It sets up a numerical and visual pattern that the text just has to adhere to.
And earlier, on page 19, the name Ibrahim, or Abraham, appears 3 times, stacked vertically.
But the example that really ties theme to structure and even crosses page boundaries is the Yusuf-Jamil pairing. This is centered on page 235.
Right, so the name Yusuf, or Joseph, who is famous for his exceptional beauty, appears 4 times, stacked vertically on that page.
But the hidden link is the thematic one.
It is. When you flip back 1 page from 235, the word that aligns horizontally with Yusuf's name on line 6 is the word Jamil.
Which means beautiful.
Exactly. So Yusuf's name stacks vertically, but his defining characteristic, Jamil, aligns with him horizontally across the page spread.
That's a major insight. It suggests the author wasn't just planning for vertical columns of words, but for meaningful thematic pairs to align across the physical boundary of the page.
And this brings us back to that central, difficult question the sources keep pushing. The Quran was revealed piecemeal over 23 years in response to questions, events.
So how could any human author ensure not just the vertical alignment of words on a page that wouldn't be compiled for centuries, but also these meaningful thematic alignments that span across pages?
It seems impossible. Any alteration to the phrasing of even one sentence over those 23 years, changing a synonym, adding a clause, would shift the line breaks, collapse the stacks, and destroy the whole structure.
The structure had to be locked in, word for word, from the very beginning.
That structural complexity is extraordinary when you're just talking about 2 facing pages. But now we're going to move into patterns that show coordination across vast distances in the text.
We're talking sometimes over 100 pages apart, yet they maintain a precise visual or conceptual link.
These are the macro alignments. They show that the structure isn't just local on one page. It's coordinated across the entire 600-page volume.
And again, it's so critical to remember, this only worked because of the rigidity of that Hafiz Osman Nuri standard. The calligrapher's specific choices allowed these long-distance connections to finally become visible.
Let's start with a famous one, the canine alignment. This concerns Kitmir, the dog of the sleepers of the caves, from the chapter Surah Al-Kahf.
Okay, so the story of the sleepers is roughly in the middle of the text.
Right. And on page 294, the phrase wa kalbum, which means and their dog, appears at a very specific spot, the end of the 7th line. This just introduces the dog into the story.
So page 294, end of line 7, and their dog. Got it.
Now you skip forward, way forward, past 140 pages of completely unrelated text to page 449.
And what do you find?
Here the actual name of the dog, Kitmir, appears at the beginning of the 7th line.
You're kidding. So the narrative introduces the dog on line 7 on one page, and then names the dog 141 pages later, also on line 7.
Exactly. And to visualize this for the listener, if you had a physical copy of this specific mushaf and you could somehow fold it so that page 294 and page 449 touch.
The two distant but related words, the description of the dog and the dog's name, would face each other perfectly across a huge expanse of text.
The probability of that happening by chance is, well, it's negligible. If the wording in any of those intervening 140 pages had been slightly different, if a sentence was just a few letters longer or shorter, the alignment would be completely lost.
It suggests the entire structural volume of all that intervening content was also predetermined.
The source material argues that this is evidence of the text being designed not just for hearing or reading for meaning, but as a visual object, built to be physically explored centuries after it was revealed.
And we also see this kind of coordination in the form of question and answer pairs.
Yes, sometimes spanning facing pages. Another form of macro alignment. If we stay on page 294 where the dog was introduced, the sleepers of the cave wake up, and they're speculating about how long they slept.
They say, "We have remained a day or part of a day," and that appears on line 11.
Right. And the answer is provided by the divine source. If you just look at the opposite facing page, page 295, Allah gives the direct answer. And they remained in their cave 300 years and added 9.
So the question and the definitive answer are placed right next to each other. The book's geometry is used to pair human uncertainty with divine knowledge.
It's a powerful literary device, but it's woven into this rigid physical structure.
Okay, moving beyond that, let's explore what might be the most systematic claim in this section. The idea of parallel meanings at identical positions.
This is the idea that across many pages, separated by huge distances, verses with similar meanings or themes will begin at the exact same line number.
So the structural template is keyed to the thematic content, not just random word placement.
Exactly. Let's look at a few examples because they really illustrate this coordination of theme and structure across the whole book.
Okay, let's take the theme of rain or water. It's a central element in the text.
Right, on page 342, a verse begins, "And we sent down water from the sky in measured quantity." And this verse starts precisely at the beginning of the page, line 1.
And then?
You skip 147 pages forward. You go past all sorts of unrelated narratives, legal passages, everything, to page 489.
And on page 489?
A corresponding verse begins. "And he who sends down water from the sky in measured quantity." Again, it starts at the beginning of the page, line 1.
The meaning is nearly identical, and the position is perfectly matched, even though they're separated by almost a third of the entire book.
We see this with complex theological themes too, like hypocrisy. Compare page 71 and page 511. They're separated by a massive 440 pages.
And on both pages, the fourth line contains a sentence about this inner contradiction of belief.
One verse says, "They say with their mouths what is not in their hearts." The other, on the other page, says, "They say with their tongues what is not in their hearts."
Same theme, same position, line 4, across a huge span of the book. The statistical barrier there is just immense.
And another one, seeking nearness to God. On pages 112 and 286, the fourth line from the bottom of the page discusses this path to the divine. Again, vast separation, identical thematic position.
But the sources say the most theologically loaded alignment is the one about free will versus compulsion.
Yes. On pages 219 and 415, both on the third line of the page, you have verses discussing faith and divine will.
The first one says, "And if your Lord had willed, those on earth would have believed all of them together."
Its corresponding verse on page 415 says, "And if we had willed, we would have given every soul its guidance."
So what's powerful there is not just the positional match on line 3, but the theological message. The verses themselves stress that faith is a choice, not a compulsion.
And the book's design reinforces that core doctrine by positioning the relevant verses at parallel coordinates. The structure itself validates the content.
So we have a structure so rigid that it coordinates word placement, like with Kitmir, and deep theological concepts like free will across hundreds of pages, all resting on those initial design rules from Hafiz Osman Nuri.
Right. But the mushaf he devised, with its 600 perfect pages, is only one example. And this is crucial.
Why is that crucial?
Because it suggests the structural miracle isn't limited to a single calligraphic style or font size. The text itself seems to be inherent with this deep structure, allowing it to manifest differently under specific, rigorous, rule-based compilations.
So you're saying the underlying source code of the text is so precise that if you apply a different structural algorithm, a different number of lines per page, for instance, a new set of equally impossible geometric or alphabetical patterns just emerges.
That's the claim. It's a huge claim. Think of it like programming. I give you 3 different sets of coding constraints. One is based on size, one on mirrored output, one on starting every line with the same variable.
Okay.
The miracle, the source argues, is that the source code adapts perfectly to all 3, without breaking the underlying narrative or meaning.
Let's get into the second of these collections then. Hafiz Ansari's Mushaf, another Ottoman scholar.
Yes, and the sources say he was inspired by a dream encounter with the Prophet Muhammad and was shown a radically different way to structure the text.
So he didn't use the shortest chapter, longest verse rule?
No, he focused purely on alphabetical symmetry. And he imposed a new, rigid rule. He used exactly 11 lines per page.
And the result of this 11-line constraint was a stunning symmetrical pattern based on the starting letter of each line. A pattern that was maintained page after page throughout the entire Qur'an.
This is where the sheer difficulty of human composition just becomes so apparent. It's a perfect example of mirror symmetry.
So explain that. How does it work?
The first line of a page starts with a specific letter, let's say Fe. The very last line of that same page, line 11, must also start with the letter Fe.
And the second line?
The second line starts with Aleph. Then the second to last line, line 10, also has to start with Aleph.
Wow. So it mirrors from the top and bottom, inward. Line 3 matches line 9, line 4 matches line 8, and so on.
Yes. And this pattern is preserved across the entire book. Imagine the constraints that places on the language.
I can't even. To maintain a coherent, theologically sound narrative, respond to the historical context, and make sure the words you choose result in this perfect alphabetical mirroring for every single page.
It's compositionally and statistically impossible for a human writing piecemeal. A human composer would have to constantly manipulate syntax, maybe even sacrifice meaning, just to make sure the next line starts with the right mirrored letter.
The fact that the source text adapts to this incredible constraint suggests the sequence of words was determined not just by meaning, but by their final alphabetical arrangement in a book format that wouldn't exist for centuries.
It forces the question, was the text revealed over 23 years, or was it revealed in a sequence that had already accounted for the future constraints of the Ansari Mushaf?
The source material definitely takes that latter position.
Okay, now for the third collection mentioned in the source. And this one might have the most extreme constraint of all.
This is the Quran Majid Alfi from Lahore.
Yes. The production of this one was an act of extreme devotion. It took 12 years to complete, and the scholar wrote it while continuously fasting.
And the unique rule applied here is it's staggering. This mushaf uses 21 lines per page, and the rule is that every single line on every single page must begin with the Arabic letter alif.
Every line, every page. For all 221 pages in this edition.
Let's do the math on that. 21 lines times 221 pages. That's over 4,600 lines, all constrained by a single starting letter.
And while alif is a common letter, to constrain a text of this length and diversity covering history, law, theology, to start every single line with it while maintaining eloquence and accuracy, it's presented as beyond human capacity.
This is way beyond simple coincidence. The difficulty isn't just finding a word that starts with alif, it's ensuring that word continues the flow of the verse, maintains theological accuracy, and that the preceding line naturally ends at the precise character count to set up that alif start.
It's a chain reaction of constraint sustained over 221 pages, and the source is presented as irrefutable evidence.
The structure of the text itself seems to just bend to these impossible preset calligraphic rules, whether the rule is based on length, mirror symmetry, or single letter repetition.
The text is, as the source suggests, structurally polymorphic. It adapts perfectly to multiple, rigid, physical templates.
All right, so we've explored the geometry, the visual alignment across these specific manuscripts. Now we're moving into the domain of word counts, where the source claims the frequency of certain words points to astronomical or structural relevance.
Right. This moves the claims from the visual plane to the purely statistical plane. These are often called mirror counts or integrated counts.
And the statistical significance is the key factor here.
Absolutely. Let's start with word counts related to time. These are beautifully precise. The word yom, which means day, appears exactly 365 times throughout the entire Quran.
Corresponding, of course, to the days in the solar year.
And reinforcing that, the word shahr, which means month, appears exactly 12 times, corresponding to the months in a year.
And the source notes these aren't approximations. They are precise, calculated frequencies from comprehensive digital analysis.
So the question becomes, how did an unlettered man, composing a text over 23 years in response to various events, manage to hit the astronomical constants of 365 and 12 on the nose, without any known system of word tabulation?
The probability of that happening randomly is it's minute. But the patterns continue with the concepts of opposites.
Yes, there's this perfect parity in the counts of opposites and related concepts. This is highly unlikely in natural language, where you'd expect frequencies to differ. For example, malak, or angel, and its opposite shaitan, Satan, both appear 88 times.
A perfect balance. What else?
The concepts of reward and punishment, Jannah, which is heaven, and Jahannam, hell, both appear exactly 77 times.
Again, you'd expect one to be discussed more than the other, but no, it's perfectly balanced.
It even extends to societal roles. Rajul, man, and Imra, woman, both appear 24 times. It suggests an intentional linguistic balancing of gender within the vocabulary structure.
And there's a beautiful theological parallel that also fits this numerical pattern.
There is. The names Isa, or Jesus, and Adam. The Qur'an mentions them both as being uniquely created without a human father.
And to mirror this unique theological status, they appear an equal number of times.
24 times each. The statistical coincidence of multiple pairs of antonyms and thematic parallels resulting in exact numerical equality is what the source material presents as just overwhelming evidence.
Okay, so now let's move to how these word counts integrate with the internal structure of the chapters themselves. This is where it gets really complex.
This is where the mathematical design seems to coordinate within the text. Let's take Surah al-Baqarah, the cow. It's the longest chapter in the Qur'an.
And the total number of verses, or ayats, in that chapter is 286.
Okay, now if you count the occurrences of the word Allah in that surah, you find it appears 282 times.
So that's close, but it's not 286.
Right. But the remaining count is made up by the specific pronoun huwa, which means he when referring specifically to God, and that appears 4 times.
So 282 plus 4 equals 286.
Which precisely matches the number of verses in the chapter. The total mentions of the divine name, or the divine referent, equals the total number of structural units in the chapter.
That's an internal integrated count. The text itself is calculating its own structure and bending that number back into the frequency of its key term.
And we see this pattern across grouped surahs as well. If you take 3 chapters, Al-Nisa, Al-Ma'idah, and El-An'am, they have a combined total of 464 verses.
And let me guess, the name Allah appears exactly 464 times in those 3 surahs combined.
That's it. The integrated word count perfectly matches the combined structural unit count across 3 major complex chapters.
The source claims that precision, maintained across 3 separate surahs, is mathematically indefensible as coincidence.
But the truly mind-bending structure involves what the sources call the doubling pattern in surah groups. This runs from Surah 2 through Surah 16.
This is where chronology, context, and word frequencies seem to merge into a massive mathematical formula.
It is. So let's break this down. We're tracking the frequency of the word Allah across 15 chapters, which are grouped into sets of 5.
Okay, so first you calculate the total count of the word Allah in the first 5 surahs. That's surahs 2 through 6. Let's call that group 1.
Right. Now you do the same for the next 5 surahs, Al-Araf through Hud. That's group 2.
And what's the relationship?
The count in group 1 is exactly double the total count of the word Allah in group 2.
A perfect 2-to-1 ratio.
Exactly. And this cascading mathematical formula continues. You then calculate the count in the third group of 5 surahs, Yusuf, through An-Nahl. That's group 3.
And the count in group 2 is exactly double the count in group 3.
Precisely. So as an example, if group 3 had 250 mentions, group 2 would have 500, and group 1 would have 1,000. This perfect 2-to-1 scaling factor, constant across these 3 chronologically mixed groupings of 5 surahs, is the claimed miracle.
I mean, if we connect that to the bigger picture, these 15 chapters were revealed at different times, in different places, responding to different events. Yet they obey this massive, cascading mathematical structure.
Any addition or subtraction or even a slight change in phrasing during those 23 years would have destroyed this entire doubling architecture.
It means the volume and word choice of these 15 chapters had to be preset to follow this specific statistical rule.
The sources claim that level of numerical control is impossible for human composition, especially one generated dynamically. It implies the frequency of the key theological terms was mathematically governed before the events requiring the revelation had even happened.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize all of this. We have the perfect page alignment, the mirrored word symmetries, the macro coordination across hundreds of pages, and these integrated numerical frequencies.
And the one overwhelming conclusion that the source material drives toward is that human authorship is just an inadequate explanation for this phenomenon.
Let's summarize the critical constraints again, because they're the foundation of the whole argument. First, the Prophet Muhammad was, historically, illiterate. He couldn't read or write.
And second, the text was revealed over 23 years, not sequentially, but in response to specific events and questions. That makes traditional pre-planning and structural layout, as we know it, impossible.
That's the core dilemma. The author would have had to know the final form of the Mushaf structure centuries in advance, down to the calligrapher's font size and page breaks.
And account for the physical space every single letter would eventually occupy, while simultaneously providing real-time, context-specific answers.
If even one word were slightly changed in response to some event, the entire geometric, numerical, and distant alignment would just collapse.
But the miracle of this structure is coupled with the miracle of the content. The source material really stresses that beyond all this structural gymnastics, the text simultaneously provides guidance across this enormous spectrum of knowledge.
It covers deep theological doctrine, faith, the afterlife, reward, punishment. It has detailed historical narratives and prophetic predictions.
It addresses profound philosophical problems, like the nature of free will versus divine omnipotence, which we saw in those aligned verses.
And on a practical level, it provides comprehensive social guidance. It's a complete moral operating system governing business, law, debt, family relations, parenting.
And it does all of this while being a recognized monument of language and literary style. And on top of that, the source claims it offers insights into science embryology, ocean currents, that were unknown at the time.
The source concludes, and it's a powerful conclusion, that no single human could possibly be an expert in just one or two of these fields, let alone all of them.
And then to weave all that diverse content into a single, cohesive, structurally flawless, and mathematically coordinated framework that only reveals its miracles centuries later.
When a specific formatting rule is applied, it's an incredible claim.
The complexity of meeting all those constraints, linguistic, historical, theological, and numerical, simultaneously, across 600 pages and 23 years of dynamic revelation, is precisely why proponents find the architecture itself to be extra-human. It's a text that appears to have been designed from the destination backward.
So to recap this deep dive, we've unpacked a mountain of internal structural evidence for the claimed divinity of the Qur'an. We went from the macro geometry of pages defined by the shortest and longest verses,
down to the micro-level symmetry, with keywords aligning vertically across hundreds of pages.
and finally to the numerical accounts that match astronomical phenomena and even the text's own internal structure, like the number of verses.
And what stands out is that these features weren't apparent to the first generations. They were hidden in plain sight. They only emerged when meticulous standards for compilation were applied centuries later.
Or, in the case of the numbers, through modern statistical analysis. The structure was waiting for the right tool, the right formatting rule, to reveal it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The sources argue that these visual and mathematical features serve as compelling evidence for a generation that increasingly demands empirical proof, a generation that wants to see it with their own eyes.
They present the text as a kind of geometrical fortress that defends its own claims.
And this raises a really interesting final question for us to consider, based on those three different mushafs we discussed.
Okay.
If these specific, highly detailed patterns only emerged when calligraphers followed a specific, rigorous set of rules, the Nuri standard, the Hansari standard, the Alfi standard.
And we know there are other divinely coordinated versions mentioned but not yet fully studied.
What other hidden geometrical or numerical patterns remain locked inside different yet undiscovered calligraphic structures of the exact same text?
A structural blueprint that just keeps revealing new layers of complexity simply by changing the formatting rules. A fascinating puzzle. We'll leave you to ponder that symmetrical, self-adapting puzzle until the next deep dive.